listening to Sinister Spotlight here at Mephisto's Castle. As you know, I am Jose, and for today's episode, I have with me none other than Carl Maines, who some of you know as the writer from I Like Horror Movies. It's a straightforward title, and it's a straightforward site, and it's one of the sites that I have the most fun reading. Carl basically reviews every horror movie under the sun, and they're always enjoyable, so when you get the chance, I highly recommend you go there. So, Carl, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and it's definitely a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really my pleasure. This is the first podcast that I've really participated in, and I appreciate just having the few readers that I have. So just knowing that it's getting out there, that people are enjoying the reviews. I only write because I like horror movies. If it wasn't apparent enough on the website, so
Yeah, right.
This is exciting. Can't wait to talk about the film, and really happy to be a part of this.
Oh, of course, and that's what we're all here for because we love the genre so much. And today's film that we are discussing, as everyone knows, it is the guest pick, and Carl has picked for us quite a controversial film, even amongst horror fans, and it's none other than the Italian cannibal flick, Cannibal Holocaust from 1980. Now, like I say, there's some pretty heavy stuff going on in this film, even by, like I say, fan standards, but Carl has picked it for his own reasons, and we should be getting into some rather interesting territory here in the next hour or so. So, Carl, if you don't mind, before we get into the really icky stuff involved in this particular film, you want to give us kind of a review of what happens in the movie, what exactly is going on in the story?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, if you're
Awesome.
gonna talk about any film, and you want debate, you want heated action, heck, you can't do better than Cannibal Holocaust. I mean, Cannibal Holocaust does divide fans, and there's people that will defend it to the end, and there are people that just absolutely despise it. And there's good arguments on both sides. Getting into the story, we have a group of documentary filmmakers that head into the Amazon looking to film what they believe are going to be these savage, cannibalistic tribes that are warring with each other. They end up disappearing, and the university that they were studying under decides to send out a professor and a rescue party to see if they can track them down and rescue them, bring them back to safety. When they get there, the savages are pretty civil, they're welcoming, but they all look pretty distressed from what may have been going on leading up to the events when the crew disappeared. So eventually they do locate, well, what's left of them, I guess. They find the two film reels that they had been filming in their skeletal remains in one of the camps of the tribes. The Professor Harold Monroe, he returns to the university and he begins screening the materials before the press gets their hands on it. And what he ends up finding is so completely revolting, disgusting, just absolutely horrifying that it's something that he doesn't even feel he can present to the public. But it would be a disservice to me to tell people anymore because you have to watch the film really to get the full impact of the events that transpire on the Cannibal Holocaust.
That's for sure. Yeah, there's some images that occur in the film that once seen, as the cliche goes, you really can't unsee them, and it's just some savage stuff.
Yeah, it is savage cinema. It's quite literally in this case.
Oh, for sure. And to kind of put into context for you, I guess is one way to put it, I wanted to ask as well, how exactly did you first come into contact with Cannibal Holocaust? Did it kind of occur the way it seems to with a lot of horror fans, where it's almost like a rite of passage almost for somebody to view this film? Was it something like that or some other type of circumstance?
Oddly enough, I just happened upon this one. It's one of the few films of this nature that I sort of just ran into by mistake. It was a fortunate mistake in my case because I happened to. But when I was in college, I don't even know if I should be saying this on the. Okay, we had a joint server where everyone was able to share information back and forth, and I was going. But horror titles were on there out of curiosity, not to download them, but just to see what was out there. And Cannibal Holocaust was on the list. So one way or another, I managed to get a chance to watch it, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. In college, I was a big slasher fan. I still hadn't really exposed myself to any of the Italian filmmaking, even to English horror. And just in watching Cannibal Holocaust, my jaw dropped. I was like, how have I not even heard of this? Like, I didn't even have words to describe it, and I went to try to explain what I had just seen to people that aren't even in the horror realm, and they looked at me like I was some sort of psychopath. And I was like, no, like you wouldn't believe, like this movie's amazing. You wouldn't even believe it exists. And this was at a time before we were getting the Cloverfield for Paranormal Activities.
Oh
To
yeah.
see something in this found footage format, it was revolutionary. Even 20, God, when was I in college? Maybe 30 years later, 25 years after it was made. So yeah, it wasn't anything planned. It wasn't that I had read about the notoriety and I couldn't wait to see this crazy, gory film. I saw the name Cannibal Holocaust. I was like, shit, with a title like Cannibal Holocaust, who am I to watch it?
Yeah, exactly. I guess in some ways that's a more profound way almost to happen upon the movie just really by accident because you were just attracted by the promises that the title kind of gave to you and
Absolutely.
yeah when you actually saw the film I could only imagine a horror fan who's been exposed to the notoriety like myself kind of goes in with these expectations. Okay, we're going to see some pretty nasty stuff happen here. But I can definitely understand what an impact it must have had on you, just having no idea really what was going to happen.
Absolutely. And with Cannibal Holocaust, it was sort of the same situation as my first experience with The Wicker Man and with Suspiria, which are also two of my favorite films. With those films, I casually come across them online, nothing that I studied up on. And then I watched them for the first time, and I didn't get the full effect. I didn't quite understand what I was seeing,
Mm,
but like Cannibal Holocaust, when I walked away from the film and for the 2 and 3 months after I had seen it, it was still lingering and it was still sticking in my mind, and I
yeah,
knew that I had to watch it. That's when I instantly knew, like, there's something going on here. This is important. This is something that really has something deeper beneath just the shocks and just beneath the gore. And I think it holds true. I think as much as people despise the film, I think it has a lot going on that takes it well beyond the exploitation realm that many people throw it into.
for sure. And again, concerning my views, which we may get into a little more later. I was pretty appalled, by the movie in general, but I try to go into all things, with as much of an open mind as is physically possible. And
Sure.
even as repulsed as I was by some of these things, I still could not deny that the film had an impact on me. Obviously, it wouldn't have had an impact on me if I didn't care what happened. But the animal brutality aside, there you can't deny. I can't even deny that there is for sure a powerful message in this movie. Now, whether how well that message might have been delivered, that's usually what's up for argument. And I think we might take
Right.
opposing sides on that, but even somebody like me who might not condone the type of some of the activity in the movie, I definitely believe that, it's a profound movie and it is really disgusting what they do. And the camera just never flinches away from it. And I think that either divides people and really disgusts them or lets them know yeah, it just shows them how far the filmmakers are willing to go to prove to
Right.
you that these people are really sick in the head.
And that's why, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, but that's why it's such an interesting point because it's such a hypocritical way to prove this
Yeah,
point. But I had to ask before I get off track.
sure.
Was it the first time that you had seen the film, or had you seen it previously?
Yes, this was my first time having seen the film, and it was kind of funny because in a previous podcast that I recorded concerning The Last House on the Left, it
Yep.
wasn't brought up in the podcast, but in conversations surrounding it, Cannibal Holocaust, I believe, was mentioned, and I had basically said that I had no interest whatsoever in seeing the movie just because of what I had heard about it. And then, of course, you come along and suggested for the podcast. And because, like I say, I try to be very open minded when it comes to things. So, I thought, well, what the hell? I'm probably going to end up watching this thing someday. So,
Absolutely.
this was my first time seeing it. Unlike yourself, I had been exposed to, obviously all the notoriety that surrounded the movie. So, I definitely went into it expecting the worst.
Oh, absolutely. And now this is part of what blogging is all about is you're putting yourself out there. You're discovering new films that you either hadn't heard of or that you intentionally haven't heard of.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, within those past couple years during college, I was a huge slasher fan. I loved the Friday the 13th, of course. I was always a big Jaws fan. My dad raised me on Jaws, but I'd
Right.
never even heard of the Hammer films, the
Wow.
Italians, Demons, maybe. So really, it was an age of discovery for me, and coming across something like Cannibal Holocaust, it just blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like it whatsoever.
Yeah, it's I can only imagine what an impression it must have made, and especially like you say before the time that that the public became so saturated with all the found footage type of films. This was really, to my knowledge, one of the very first, if not the first, film to use that type of approach.
Absolutely, at least in the horror genre. The
Yeah,
cinema had been used in French film documentary filmmaking, of course, but the horror genre, I believe this is the one that revolutionized it. And I think not only did it adapt the style, but I still consider the look of the film to be so authentic and so true to the events that are occurring that I don't blame the Italians. I don't blame the Italian authorities for pulling Deodato in and putting him on for legitimately killing people because it looks so real when you're watching it, even now, somewhat 30 years after it was made.
yeah, no, it looks extremely real. There are some moments, of course, where you start to question it a bit, particularly in all the disembowelment type scenes. But something, the rape scene, for instance, where they're all rolling around in the mud and raping
Oh,
this the tribeswoman. It's just done in such an authentic way. They're just all the guys are going at it and they're being they're like frothing swine. I'm sorry if I'm forgetting the characters' names, but Faye, I believe it is the woman filmmaker. She's just screaming at them to stop, that they're going too far, and that they're wasting film, which it obviously seems such like a trivial thing at the moment. Oh, we're wasting film. Well, how about the fact that we're raping somebody?
and
But
that's a great point because when she interjects with that,
yeah,
that's where I feel that it's the most real because she comes in and says, "Stop! You're wasting film." Like of everything that's going on, that's still her primary concern, and
yeah,
in the characters' minds, that's what's most important. And that, to me, like it's subtle things like that really take it above all the other films of its kind. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that that's really important in that scene, and it works right back into the plot. And the scene is impossible to watch. Like
yeah.
I find that rape scene to be easily on par with Last House on the Left, and I Spit on Your Grave.
Oh,
It's
sure.
watch that. Like it's horrifying.
Yeah, and it's just filthy because they're it's almost something like you'd see in a Bosch painting, almost just the like a depiction of hell or something, just them rolling around in their own filth and defiling this poor woman. And going back
But
to quote unquote trivial complaint that Faye makes, it's interesting as well to note that especially in say a film like Cloverfield, it's kind of hard to believe that the characters not only would film, this gigantic monster attacking the city
right,
in such a comprehensive way, but in this movie, particularly when the cannibals take Faye, Alan goes back with the camera to catch the footage. He doesn't go back to save her. He films her
right.
from a distance. And in this movie, with with everything being presented, beforehand, showing us what a complete lunatic jackass these people are, Alan
Right.
in particular, that makes sense. It makes
Oh,
sense that he goes back to see it. It's not just a hokey way for us to see what happens. You believe that that's what the character would naturally do.
no, absolutely. And in fact, if he were to go back and try to save her, then it would be breaking the realm of reality because he wouldn't
Exactly.
believe. Like, no, after everything that he's done, no, that's another excellent point. And I think what I like about the film is what many people also dislike, where it shows the characters just walking through the jungle, and people say, well, it's so boring. Like they're not even doing anything. But that's the point. Like they're
Yeah.
not doing anything. So it lends an authenticity, it lends integrity to what you're watching because you feel like you're right there along the journey. It's also what I liked in Paranormal Activity. People complain, oh, it's so boring. Nothing happens for so long. Well, in real life, you're not going to have popping out of the closet every 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Real life is boring.
Oh, and I find the inaction in Cannibal Holocaust to be just as well played as the action scenes.
Yeah, yeah, that is a point that I would totally agree with. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned in your review that you posted on your blog, just the little touches like during that one particular scene where one of the scenes where they're walking through the forest, the audio cuts in and out,
Right.
and that's something that would naturally happen, if you're lugging this camera equipment around in the green inferno. Your sound might not work at some point. It lends that authenticity to the movie, like, oh, the camera doesn't always work, and it catches things 100% clear, clearly all the time. Shit happens and the audio doesn't work, and you just watch these people getting out of showers and joking around. It just, like you say, it just makes you believe that these are real people that much more.
And then when another thing that I really like, and this happens particularly in the steak scene, the
Yeah.
one that everyone associates with the film,
Mm-hmm.
you see a shift of viewpoint from the two different filmmakers and the two different cameras, and as it's shifting between the two cameras, you see two distinctly different types of film that are being shot directly from the cameras. And again, that's just something that it's like it's so small, and upon initial viewing, that's the last thing you're paying attention to. But when you look at it and you see that, you're like, Jesus, like, this is a movie where, like, penises are getting cut off and women raped with giant, like, pieces of rock and stuff. And they actually took the time to think this out. Like, it's so contradictory to itself. And again, it's what set Cannibal Holocaust apart from Cannibal Barracks, Mountain of the Cannibal God, and the other films within
Yeah.
the genre. There, it's just there's no excusing the exploitation. It's imitative and it's only done for shock
Oh
value.
yeah.
Here, there's stuff going on that really took some thought and some planning, and that's something that can at least be appreciated for people that hate the film. There's some level where you have to admit, like, there's something going on. Like, the filmmakers are making a film still. They're not only trying to shock in this case.
Exactly, and I can say with confidence, as somebody who did see Cannibal Ferox. This was quite a few years ago, but I do remember a good deal of the movie. You can definitely distinguish the difference between that movie and Cannibal Holocaust, because, like you say, there is no underlying message of Cannibal Ferox.
Not
Unless they're basic. If there is, or if Lindsay were to say there was, or any other the creative people behind the movie, it'd just be they just be aping the message basically of what Diodato was doing with Cannibal Holocaust. You got people just like stabbing the tribespeople's eyes out in such a schlocky, sadistic fashion. There's really no redeeming quality about that movie whatsoever. And as harsh as some of the images are in Cannibal Holocaust, like we've said, you can at least give it props, so to speak, for having a message. Again, whether that message was delivered in the most fashionable way or not,
right.
you know, whatever. At least it tried to be something better than it was meant to be.
Oh, absolutely. And we don't even know that that was even intended. That could have just come
Yeah.
out. Screenwriter intended it, but Deodato, he could have like not given any shit. Nobody would be any the wiser. But the fact that we're able to take that away from it, again, just that lends something more to the film. So intent left completely aside, we'll never know the true intention of the screenwriters and director because they can say anything they want to.
Yep.
It's something that can be interpreted, and art should be interpreted, and art is meant to evoke emotion, whether it's anger, love, and this film invokes emotion. You can't walk away unscathed.
Of course.
It doesn't project something right now because I don't know that I'll find a place to later. And this
Sure.
is completely, well, it's, I guess, completely off topic. If anyone owns the DVD for Mountain of the Cannibal God, there's an interview with Sergio Martinez, the director, and he tries to justify Mountain of the Cannibal God, and he tells this story about how they're filming, I believe, in Indonesia, and everyone's Mormon over there, oddly enough, and so they all had strong religious beliefs against what he was filming because there was sex, there was violence, and he said, I don't know what the big deal was. Like, we didn't even film anything that was even remotely exploitative. And then brilliant director behind the special feature. He does a montage to the most ridiculous music of cannibals pickfucking, like cannibals raping each other, like killing cannibals, and it's the most brilliantly funny thing that isn't in the movie. So anyone that is into the cannibal film, you gotta see the special feature. So that's my plug for Cannibal God.
Well, that's pretty hilarious. The other cannibal films are what they are. You know, there's no denying that they are purely exploitative, and the fact that the guy who was filming that special feature was able to pick that up and basically, you know, make Martino eat his words is pretty damn funny.
It's a moment, and I'm gonna track that guy down and shake his hand one day. And that whole deal ties back into what Cannibal Holocaust is all about, because it just goes to show that the film is correct. Like, there was a market for the cannibal films and for killing animals for exploitation, and that's how these films were made, because sensationalism sells, and it's true to this day. Like, sensationalism happens in the movies, it happens in the news, and so there's still a deep-rooted message that continues to present itself in society now 30 years later.
The manner in which they carried this film out is still potent, and going back to something you said earlier about even a film such as this being considered art, which I agree with. You know, I agree that this film is art because, like you say, if your definition of art is that it invokes emotion from the viewer or the listener or what have you, the audience, then right, this film certainly meets that criteria, because you can't. I can't think of anybody who could forget this movie, whether they love it or they hate it. I mean, I can't imagine anybody not being completely mentally blasted by what they've seen.
Yeah, you don't forget Cannibal Holocaust. It's like your first time.
Well, talking about several of these cannibal flicks that we mentioned here, we've mentioned Ferox and Mountain of the Cannibal God.
Right.
I wanted to ask you, in your own, in your opinion, what exactly do you think is the appeal of this certain subgenre, the Italian cannibal flick? Do you think there's something else at work here that isn't in other exploitation movies, that there's something special about it?
I want to say, yeah, dude, there's totally a much deeper level to it. But no, I honestly don't. I think that it's like a lot of the Italian zombie films, it's no deeper subject matter than it is as it's presented. I think it's purely for the exploitation and for the gore, because there's a market for it. Like, especially in the early 80s, everyone wanted to see just the most horrific ways of dying and just seeing people having their arms and legs ripped apart. So I think that it is, the genre at large is geared towards the gore audience, and I think that it fulfills that specific niche. I think that there are some points where they tried to do something a little different. I think Mountain of the Cannibal God, it has some action-packed moments that are pretty good. Sergio Martino, you can't discredit him as a cinematographer. His films look great,
right,
but there's a deeper message to be found in it. I really think that they are exploitation for exploitation's sake. And Cannibal Holocaust, whether it was intended to be or not, just happens to transcend that particular market. But just when you look at Cannibal Ferox, I've watched it several times, and I try desperately to find any value in it whatsoever. Interestingly enough, I hate Cannibal Ferox. I think it's a piece of shit. Like, it's just garbage, and it's got a few scattered gore scenes, but I think the film at large is just imitative trash. And I feel that way about most of the cannibal films. The Holocaust is the only one that's ever appealed to me.
Right. Yeah, and then there's also Eat 'em Alive, if I'm not mistaken. That's another Lenzi movie.
Well, that one isn't even a freaking movie. That is a clip show. Like,
oh, really?
It's a cannibal movie. It cannibalizes the cannibal movies. You're getting Man from Deep River, Cannibal Holocaust, Ferox. It's all, if you didn't want to buy them separately, just buy Eat Alive, because they string them all together with the most worthless, like, cult. There's some plot about a cult or something. I owned that, and that's one of maybe 5 DVDs that I've sold in my entire life as a collector.
Just to get rid of it.
There's no point. Like, if I'm going to be watching all the movies, I don't even need to own it to review it. I just say, well, all the movies that are in it are trash. So what do you, yeah, no, you know, again, it's garbage. The exploitation for exploitation's sake.
Wow. Yeah, I've never seen Eat in the Life, so I didn't know that. It almost kind of sounds like it's the faces of death of the cannibal movies.
And yeah, it really is. It's a clip show basically. So it saves you a lot of money if you don't really want to buy the rest of it.
Yeah, I guess so, if you're looking at it from an economical standpoint, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, one of the things we've talked about, we touched upon how genuinely, obviously real all the events in Cannibal Holocaust seem, and perhaps it's just me, maybe I'm crazy, but I felt like, particularly in this movie, yeah, amongst the other cannibal movies, it almost seemed like the Green Inferno, the jungle that these tribes resided in, it almost seemed like it was more than just a setting to me. It seemed like it was a literal hell almost. Like this was more than just a plot of land for the action to take place on. It seemed like it was almost a living, breathing thing. Did you get anything along those lines when you watched this movie?
yeah, there's scenes all throughout the film that draw upon that. When you look at the old woman that goes to the riverbank to die, she's literally being eaten alive by the jungle. The maggots are crawling on her. They say this woman is going to be here until a crocodile comes and disembowels her.
Right.
That regenerative force of nature is constant all throughout the film. And again, when they get to the scene that I liken to the Lord of the Flies, where they're raping the girl in the mud, it's it's almost as if the jungle is bringing out the savages in them,
Mm,
and it's sort of transforming them. They're becoming more beast-like the further that they get into it. So in that sense, it's sort of like the Heart of Darkness, even. And it
yeah.
draws upon the same themes where the jungle is absolutely a living, breathing force in this film, and that can't be mistaken as you watch it. All the characters, even when you look at Monroe and his team, and when they're going in as well, the characters when they're outside of the jungle are civil. They talk casually. When they start getting into the jungle, they start doing cocaine. They start joking more profusely,
Yeah.
and you see a true progression.
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost kind of funny, grimly funny, because it almost seems like you mentioned, that the jungle itself is consuming the people that enter it. Like it's to I hate to put it in such a in such a heavy-handed way, but the jungle is eating them alive. It's eating
Right.
away at their civilized manners, and reverting them to you know primordial savages.
Absolutely. And in every instance, you have the jungle fighting back against what they're doing. You have the snake bite that
Yeah.
kills Felipe. Have the jungle just viciously attacking them, trying to prevent them from what's ultimately going to happen. And I think that the savages, they've come to terms with themselves. They may be cannibals. It's even debatable up until a point whether or not they physically do go out and eat people, or whether they just like they use that as a defense mechanism. I think that it shows when people come to terms with the beast within themselves that they're able to live in this sort of jungle inferno and deal with their inner beast, inner turmoil. But then when you have this outside force enter the jungle, it truly transforms them, and they become the true savages in the film.
Yeah, and that, as we've alluded to before, that is seems to be the overall message that Diodato and the rest of the creative team is trying to convey to us, that these NYU students who come from what we know, pretty upper crust, surrounding and environment, that they in this environment are the real savages. They, as you find out in the movie, they basically provoke the violence that they film in their documentaries. So it's they are really the instigators of this horror that they're capturing on film, and it's the same for when they go into the jungle. Now, like we said before, that message, that these good, so to speak, people are really the monsters, are the real monsters, the real cannibals, as Monroe says. some people feel that that message might become hampered by the events that occur in the film. Do you agree with that? And when I say that, I'm mainly talking about the scenes where we see the filmmakers kill actual living animals on screen. Do you believe that, the overall power of this message might be, hampered by the fact that we're actually seeing these people kill animals on screen?
And that's the topic that's sort of always the elephant in the room, and
Oh
the
yeah,
one that Cannibal Holocaust fans typically look to avoid because there's when you get into an argument about the animal cruelty, there's no way to truly defend it.
of course.
I I don't feel as objectionable to it as most people. I feel that the animal cruelty, given the nature of the plot, the nature of the characters and the setting, that it's foreseeable that those events would happen, and that if any movie could justify it, it would be a film like this. But when you're just outright like slaying animals on screen, there's never a point where you say, no, it's for art's sake. Like, they're doing it, they know what they're doing when they're doing it. They're doing it because it's shocking and it's revolting, and because, again, it's a gut punch. When you see an animal being killed on screen, like, instant reaction. And the only way that I've ever come to terms and been able to defend it is in the sense that when these characters enter the jungle, and I apologize to anyone that hasn't seen the film for spoiling this, when they enter the jungle, we're on their side. We see them, they're joking, they're laughing. These are fun college kids. They're out to make a true documentary. When they start their progression and they're entering the jungle, they're killing animals, we start building this hatred for them. And when you see someone like slice open an animal's throat just to watch it die, there's no mistaking it. You begin to hate that individual. And in that sense, it's a smart move that is just hard to defend because if the intent is to create these characters that you despise so that their punishment is justified, Deodato completely achieves what he set out to do. But are the means of achieving that worth the end goal if it means like just outright killing animals? It's impossible to defend the actions, although the effect is obviously there.
Yes.
It's at a I don't necessarily know that if had they gone with special effects, if they could have achieved that same effect, you would have known a fake animal from a real animal when it comes down to that level of reality. And in maintaining the film's integrity, which again is a big part of the power of Cannibal Holocaust, like you can see why it was done, you can see how it was done, and you can obviously see the impact that it has. It's just, again, how can I convince someone that's an animal lover that, oh, no, it's okay, it was for film's sake. Like, it's being preserved as art, so it's okay to go out and kill animals. It's not the message I try to send, and I don't think if I asked Deodato, hey, did you mean to go out and just kill animals because you're a fucking asshole and you hate animals? I don't think he took that. I think there were probably pressures from producers and things, as is definitely the case with the other cannibal films, but it's an unfortunate part of the film that still at some level feel increases its integrity and its authenticity. It sucks that it had to come to that for them to achieve that goal.
Exactly. I agree with you 100% in that regard. It's a double-edged sword because when you perform an act like that, you run the risk of really turning the audience against you, not just the characters who are carrying out these acts, but just the filmmakers in general, like it has for a lot of people who've seen this movie. And one thing I've said is that, if anything, those scenes really perfectly capture the stupidity and the senselessness aspect of violence, because you just can't get any more unbiased and chaotic as that. They're just killing because they want to, and that's what chaos is.
Yeah, no, I agree with that point as well. It's just it's so reckless. It's dangerous cinema. It's something that could only have come out of the 70s and 80s,
Oh, yeah.
and this turmoil, like social, political turmoil, where there was so much chaos in the world, and it's reflected on film. And again, is it reflected on film because of a deeper message, or is it reflected on film because they could get away with it at the time because people weren't putting a watchful eye on what was going on? It's difficult to say. But when you look back at other things like photographers after World War II who took these horrifying images of people that had been burnt by the atomic radiation,
Mm-hmm.
do we blame the photographers for taking exploitative photos of people, or do we look at it as this is a piece of history that's preserved? It is hurt and it's horrifying, but it's a part of our reality and it's a part of our world.
See, that's an interesting point that you bring up, though, because with the example that you use, that's more along the lines of an outsider kind of recording the horrificness that had already occurred. But with Cannibal Holocaust, it's almost like it's a different story, and I think it's the defining reason that it is so controversial. It's because the filmmakers themselves provoked that violence. It wasn't as if they happened to catch, like they do on Discovery Channel, animals fighting and devouring each other. They, actively killed the animals themselves. So it's not like, they took pictures of, say, victims, whether they be human or animal, as opposed to the example that you use. So I think that's why people have a harder time accepting it.
Sure, and that's what comes back to another interesting point is when the film was sold. Of course, Deodato had the cast completely remove themselves from the scene and from society
Yeah.
because his intention was to sell the film as authentic footage. And when you see an animal die like that, again, it's going back like, sure, this is just excusing it again, but when you're going and you're showing animals being killed like that, they're like, there's no mistaking it. I'm sure if I would have seen that in the early 80s, knowing the level of special effects that preceded it, I would have been shitting my pants in the theaters because I'd be like, my God, like just like I did when I was a teenager watching Blair Witch Project, I was like, that shit is fucking real. Like, these people are fucking dead. Like, there's no mistaking it. When you watch it, it looks real and it looks authentic. So that sort of creates this interesting situation, at least in Cannibal Holocaust's sake, because it's being shot as if it were documentary filmmaking. It's being shot as if it were that person that was there taking photographs of post-World War II victims. As far as anyone is supposed to be concerned, because it's filmed in this cinema verite format, this is truth. The images that you're watching are authentic. They have been taken from a camera of a person that's now dead. And in that sense, like, does it transcend like what it would be normally if they were just, for instance, Cannibal Barracks, where they do just go out and it's shot to be a film? Is there any differentiation there? Most people are going to tell you no. Like, you're an asshole for even thinking that. Like, you hate animals too, and you probably support Bush, and it's not necessarily the case. It's a tightrope that you walk when you're trying to defend the film, because you'll never convince people that there's any situation in which it's permissible to kill the animals. So any of this, the only hope would be that in discussing it, bringing it to surface, you can give some sort of insight into the possible mindsets of what was going on, and lend credibility to the film format. And I bring this point up just because of how absurd it really is when you try to argue the point. In the documentary that you watch on the film itself, when they would kill the animals, they would feed them to the locals. So is it any worse than killing a pig and feeding the pig to the locals? I mean, where do you draw the line? If the animals aren't literally being killed and thrown to the side, they're being killed and they are being used as food. But again, it's going back to exploitation. They're exploiting the death of the animal for shock and impact.
Right.
So you can just, it's great because it's so provoking, and it's a controversial subject matter that keeps this movie alive. It keeps this movie on the top of people's tongues.
Yeah, for sure. And like you say, it's just a really tough call, even for hardened horror fanatics to make, because even if you try to justify it for yourself, you feel bad for doing that, just because it's a horrible thing. and to justify it, then you have to start, wondering to yourself, okay, well, what else do I think is permissible to be, filmed for a movie? And it's just a tough call. And if anything, the reason that this film is probably so controversial is just because it makes people feel so uncomfortable. Not
Oh, sure.
just because you feel like you're a guilty witness to something that you shouldn't have seen, and that to most people isn't an enjoyable viewing experience.
Absolutely. And what you just touched on, again, is a very, very important piece of the puzzle for exploitation filmmaking. Going beyond the Cannibal Holocaust, but tying into like the rape in the film. It's not just the animal cruelty. Like
Oh yeah.
when you're watching rape, you can't. I say I love Cannibal Holocaust, and people look at me like I'm some sort of pervert because women are raped. Women have genital mutilation. Like there's a baby that's torn out of a woman's stomach before she's beaten to death, and the
Oh
baby's
yeah.
caught in the water, in the mud. There's horrific, horrific images, and yet people say, I love that movie. Well, it's not that you love the events in the film necessarily. For instance, I Spit on Your Grave. I think that Camille Keaton's performance in that is like, it's astounding because it's so real and so visceral, and it leaves you with a profound impact. But then you tell someone that you love, I Spit on Your Grave, a torture rape film, and they look at you like you're a complete monster. And it's not that you like the rape, it's not that you are permissive of the acts and that you're using it as a catalyst, and it's because you like rape and you want to go out and rape people. It's, I think, just the way that it's captured, it's creating horror. This is real life horror. Rape is something that is occurring, and it doesn't glorify it at any point in the film. I Spit on Your Grave, Last House on the Left, they don't glorify rape. They don't glorify torture. They make it as sickening, as perverse as it could possibly be imagined. When you watch it, you feel like you are watching a true rape because it has an immediate impact, and it leaves you just feeling floored and disgusted. And the same impact with Cannibal Holocaust. When you watch the rape, when you watch the murders, you are immediately affected and you are disgusted, and that is what makes it art. That's what makes it important. Just like when you would look at, I want to say De Goya, I can't remember the name of the artist, the Spanish painter that painted scenes from the Spanish Civil War. It's of people being murdered, people being shot, and it's his way of lashing out against this sort of political upheaval that was going on at the time. It's not meant, most art is meant to be beautiful, sure, but some art is meant to attack the senses, and such is definitely the case in Cannibal Holocaust. It rates you,
Yeah.
or gets raped more than anyone else.
Yeah, exactly. And getting back to the point that you make that it doesn't glorify these acts. The funny thing is, you know, you could probably find somebody who would think the exact opposite and who would say that, Cannibal Holocaust and I Spit on Your Grave and Last House on the Left do glorify rape, and it all goes back to just the subjectivity of art. Somebody could probably make a good argument that there's nothing, like you say, there's nothing appealing about the sexual, acts that are performed in this movie.
Right.
But somebody else could say that, oh, those were meant to titillate the audience. That people were supposed to get a rise out of those, and it just, it's a sticky subject. Art is meant to be, I think it's meant to be subjective, but when you're talking about material and content like this, it really sets people apart because, like you say, when you profess your love or adoration for a film or a book or whatever that contains an act like this, it tends to raise some eyebrows because the first immediate reaction is people think that you're drawn to the content and not really the message that the content is enveloped in.
No, absolutely. And this is another segue that I love to make is my stepdad. He absolutely hates horror movies. He can't believe that I can watch that filth, as he puts it.
Yeah.
And then go and watch a movie like Die Hard or these big action flicks where hundreds of people are just shot to death
Oh
and
yeah.
blown apart and everything. He has no problem accepting killed off camera in a fully implied way with very little bloodshed, that is somehow not acceptable. Like it's really interesting the dichotomy that's created between people that love and hate particular films, and that's why I had to choose Cannibal Holocaust because it's want to bring it up when you're in a group of several people and everyone's seen the film and you can get those differing opinions on the film because no one is going to be without opinion. Everyone has a. In fact, when I told my wife that I was going to be speaking on the film, and I said, yeah, I've got to put it back on. I got to do my review. I'm so excited. She looked at me and she said, you're not putting Cannibal Holocaust on. She walked out of the room, and I had to watch it by myself because she absolutely refuses to watch it. There's no gray area. It's white or black with Cannibal Holocaust. Nobody says, yeah, it's okay. Like, I don't mind it. I guess it's all right. Like, you either fucking love it or you hate it. It's really a dividing film.
Exactly. And for those of you listening, if you're having relationship troubles and you're looking for a way out, screen Cannibal Holocaust and your problems should clear up in a matter of seconds.
I literally told someone that at work today. Like, the exact same conversation.
Well, yeah, but that just goes back to the dividing power that it has. You are either on one side or the other. You can't. Most people can't sit on the fence with this movie, and but it's just the power of its content, like we said. But that's a very interesting point that you brought up just now about the action movie deaths, so to speak, and the horror movie deaths. And it's funny because if anything, I would easily argue that an action movie probably has a better chance of glorifying the deaths that occur there than a horror movie does, because the in horror, it's meant to show you the darkness that's inherent in something like death. It's showing you the dark side basically. In action movies, it's just all adrenaline pumped and red blooded, just bravery. And when you see like Alan Rickman fall from the skyscraper in slow motion, you're cheering. Which, not to say moments like that don't happen in horror movies when the villain dies, so to speak, but it's I think it's much more common for an action movie to take the route of, oh, it's hey, whatever, they're just they're just casualties, it's no big deal. Horror movies, if anything, puts significance on those deaths, and that makes them seem much more real, and I think that's what turns people away, because death is kind of pushed to the wayside in action movies, whereas horror movies, it's right there in your face and you can't turn away from it.
Yeah, and the clarification there is a key term, because when you do look at the horror movie, up until late 80s, when the villains became the heroes, so to say, in the slasher films, the people that are dying are the heroes. You don't want to see them die, except, again, when you get to some of the stupider characters in the later slashers. In the action movies, the hero is glorified. He's blowing away these bad guys. Yeah, he's blowing their heads off. Good, they're freaking neo-Nazis, or they're terrorists. Like, it absolutely glorifies the death of these people in the action films, where in the horror film, the villain is killing people. You don't want to see people die. They do die, and when they do die, like you said, there's significance there. They aren't nameless guy with a gun running around like in the jungle with Rambo blowing them away.
Yeah, they're not henchman number 2. That's Stacy, the girl you've known and have loved for the last 60 minutes, and now she's dead.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so
it's a really interesting point between the action and the horror films. So I'm bringing that up to my stepdad, but then he just scoffs, and of course.
Kind of getting back to Cannibal Holocaust specifically here, I did read up that Deodato has said in later years that he kind of basically feels bad for the animal deaths, and he feels, if I'm not mistaken, and this is IMDb here, so the validity of these statements is up for grabs, I guess. He actually stated that if he could, he probably wouldn't have made the movie at all. Now, that's a little bit of a drastic statement, so I kind of want to back up and ask you, do you think the movie would have been as powerful if the animal deaths had maybe not been substituted with special effects, but do you think it would still be the same movie if it didn't have them at all, or were maybe substituted with some other type of, diabolical act on the part of the characters?
That is an excellent question and a great point to bring up to Cannibal Holocaust fans. And if you own the Grindhouse release, I'm not sure about the subsequent releases. There is an option. There's two options. One is ludicrous, but the other one is not so ludicrous. Still ludicrous. And if you're a hardcore fan, the one is the animal cruelty-free version, where you can watch the version of the film where Grindhouse has gone through and said, you know what, we understand that this is a sensitive subject matter, and they've removed that footage, which I think opens the film up to some people. I'll get into the compromising of integrity later. And then I just have to bring up the fact that there's a third version that exists that also removes the objectionable sexual and violent content of the film.
Huh.
When it gets to that point, what's the point? Why are you watching the film? Like,
Yeah.
if you can't take the animal cruelty or the violent and sexual nature of the film, then you're probably better off not watching Cannibal Holocaust.
I would say so.
Walking around the jungle for about like an hour or so with a half an hour of missing footage.
Yeah, it's like Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah, literally. It's like some kids are going to be scared of Sauron and some of the orcs and stuff. Let's just do the happier scenes and cut the rest of the film. Anything that's objectionable is gone. It'd make for a great half an hour.
Yeah.
Ship of the Ring. So getting back to the animal cruelty, I believe that it is what it is, and that it exists, that it's not integral to the success and the popularity of the film, but that it has like a very particular place in history for having that content. And I don't necessarily think that it would not be a cult classic if that was removed, but I think that it would certainly have lost notoriety. I think it may have fallen a little to the wayside and that it wouldn't be mentioned as often. I still think the gore alone and the subject matter, the context of the theme would still have an appeal and would still place it leagues above the other films of its kind. But there's no denying that if Deodato wouldn't have filmed those scenes at the producer's request, even at his own request, whatever the fault may be, it would have had a dramatic effect on how the film was perceived in the years since its release.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too, for sure. And as, as against the animal cruelty as I may be, kind of reiterating what I said before, it can't be denied the significance it has to not just the overall story, but the message, really. And I can't help but find that thing you said about the third option on the Grindhouse release. That's, I mean, that's almost like you're making up for too much. It's like, okay,
Right.
like you say, I understand their iffiness about animal cruelty because animals are actually killed. We've established that, but taking out the sexual acts, I mean, that's like taking out the sexual acts in any movie. I mean, it's like, oh, just because there are real animal deaths, that makes the stage sexual acts not cool anymore. So
Right.
should we go through every movie that's ever had a rape scene and just take that out? I'm sure Last House on the Left and I Spit on Your Grave would be really interesting movies to watch if they didn't have the rapes in them.
Well, and that's this is another tangent, but when Tom Green was at his peak of popularity, he released Freddy Got Fingered, which I think is probably rated the worst movie of all time, and intentionally made to be so. But the brilliance behind Tom Green's act is in the special features. He did the same thing as Cannibal Holocaust. He created a PG-friendly version of his own film, and it is a 5-minute clip show that gets rid of all of the abusive humor and all of like the disgusting acts he does, and it's bloody hilarious because it's so absurd that you would even make a PG-13 version of Freddy Got Fingered, because the whole intent is to not be PG-13. Such is the case with Cannibal Holocaust.
Exactly.
The PG-friendly version of Cannibal Holocaust is like you almost think that's hilarious. Like, good for you. Like that's the funniest joke on the viewer ever.
Yeah, it's like it's a travelogue now. It's not even a movie.
Oh, like it's now literally a documentary of the rainforest, and I'd be surprised if there's even any cannibals in it at all. It
Yeah,
should
right.
be fun time. Like it's no longer Cannibal Holocaust if there's no cannibals or Holocaust.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because I wouldn't be surprised if Eli Roth knowingly did this, but on the Cabin Fever DVD, there's a family-friendly version of the movie, and his version is literally 2 seconds long. You just see the friends in the truck smiling at each other, and it ends. So it's like I'm not sure if the Grindhouse release might have came. I don't think it would have come out that long ago, but it's almost kind of like he's knowingly nodding at the fact that that option would even be available. He's also kind of poking fun at the idea of a family friendly version of Cabin Fever.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's hilarious, and it brings out like sort of the absurdity of the argument itself because it goes back to censorship. It's another great point in favor of the film because censorship is something that's crippled art for all of mankind. Like,
Yeah.
and what point is censorship acceptable in our society? Like, do we want to be censored for what we can say? Do we want to be censored for what we can do or make? And Cannibal Holocaust is a perfect example of censorship. I think it goes without saying that it's on the video nasties list,
Yeah.
censorship in England, and just censorship in general. If we can't accept Cannibal Holocaust because it does have animal violence and because it does have rape and disgusting acts of gore, okay, so that's no longer acceptable. Well, now, it has some cussing too. Let's get rid of that. Let's keep pulling back until we're in this extremely controlled totalitarian society that's dictated for us. Like, that's essential to horror, and it's essential to just the freedom of expression. And if freedom of expression means creating films like Cannibal Holocaust, I would still prefer it over having complete thought control.
Exactly. And that's basically the other side of the coin to what we mentioned before about where does the viewer draw the line between what is acceptable in their films. Well, once you start making exceptions for animal violence, then it goes further and further down the line. Okay, are human deaths genuine human deaths acceptable in film?
Right.
And like you say, on the other side, that's you start wondering how far do you go censoring things. You start with the animal deaths because those are real. Well, you know what? Yeah, the disembowelment stuff and the cutting off of the penis, we could probably do without that. And both sides have their disadvantages because if you keep going and going, in the directions that they do, then you pretty much aren't left with anything good, basically. So it's you with something like this, you gotta try and find the happy medium. I'm not sure if that's the most applicable term for this movie, but that's basically what you have to do. You have to, for yourself, you have to, say what you find acceptable, and it doesn't have to be in any clear terms, just as long as you're okay with what it is that you're being subjected to. And if, you can do that, then you should stay sane for the most part, I think.
Sure. And again, if this movie had no substance to it whatsoever, it could easily be dismissed just for being garbage.
Of course.
But looking back at other films like Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs,
yeah,
it stood the test of time, and it fell under harsh criticism. Cannibal Holocaust, same deal. Harsh criticism upon its release for these very reasons. But here it is, 30 years later, fans around the world still know of its existence, and it's become a cult, like, pop culture icon. You see people wearing T-shirts of Cannibal Holocaust.
Yeah.
When I was looking at images, I was looking at people who had full mannequins of the chick that's on the pipe.
Wow.
Like, in their houses, no less. Like, not just in haunted houses, but in their garage. So it's like, invite the family over for dinner, and there's a chick with the spike going through her, like, freaking mouth. It has stood the test of time, and that is another credit towards its validity as a piece of art, because it there's something about the film that has given it this sort of this life that, again, in another 20 years, we can have the same conversation and see the effect that it has over newer generations that had, like, they didn't belong to this era of filmmaking. I was born right when this film was coming out, and when our society continues to progress, I think this film will still be just as impactful and have just as much social and political significance, because there will never be a point where media sensationalism and media control don't have a direct effect on our lives. And that's a theme that will live on for hundreds of years, hopefully, unless we fall under neo-Nazi control and some longer allowed the freedom of expression. But that's not the hope here.
Yeah, but no, I feel the same way. I mean, hey, if this movie merits as little as, two geeks taking the time to talk about it in a podcast, then something special must be going on with it. But it's you use the example of Straw Dogs, and you compare it to Cannibal Holocaust, two diversely different films, but impactful and long lasting nonetheless. And I want to make it blatantly clear. I'm not sure if I really have so far, and if I have, I apologize for reiterating, but I do want to make it clear that personally I find that the animal deaths highly objectionable. I don't like them one bit. Yeah, it was enough for me to go on a little mini rant on Facebook just because the one moment in particular where one of the filmmakers actually shoots a piglet at point blank range while the animal is tied up. I mean, that was enough to set me off, and it was just too much for me. But
like, yeah, your point is absolutely valid and appreciated.
Yeah, and like I say though, despite all of that though, can't argue against the fact that it's still around because we're talking about it. If it was, like you say, if it was anything less, we wouldn't have taken the time to discuss its significance. I mean, you take a look at Cannibal Ferox, and there's. Sorry, by the way, for Cannibal Ferox getting the brunt of all our jokes here. If any fans out there listening to this, my apologies. But seriously, that movie in comparison to this one, there's nothing that has merit about it at all compared to Cannibal Holocaust, and that one is, and Eaten Alive, like we say, that one is another one that can just be written off as pure schlock. There's nothing going on there. Right. But Cannibal Holocaust, there is something at work. Whether you agree with the events that occur in the film, hey, that's your thing. If you're okay with animal deaths, great. If you're not, then no surprise. But I don't think somebody could logically argue against the social significance that the film has had, whether they like it or not. I think that's just a point that you can't go against.
And that's one thing that I do find interesting, because people whose opinions I truly respect, who I think are really brilliant critics and brilliant writers, they feel completely opposite, and they say, no, this is only garbage, and this has absolutely no redeeming value. And I question that, because I understand your stance on the film and that you don't like it, but sometimes liking and appreciating are two separate things. And
yes.
Like, I don't like Cubism. I think Cubism is a terrible art form, but I appreciate significance, and liking it to Cannibal Holocaust may be a stretch, but when someone says, no, Cannibal Holocaust is garbage, and you can't argue against that, I find it a little hard to take, because I think that it is objectionable, and I think it's provocative, but I think that it is important, and that it is a piece of horror and cinema history that will be around. Again, it'll have a lasting effect, and it is important for horror fans to at least see or understand within its context, because it's in the annals of horror. It's defined periods of filmmaking. It has sort of become the benchmark for Italian gore. It has its place, and to just write it off and ignore it and to not give it any credit whatsoever is sort of a disservice to the genre and a disservice to the few merits that I feel the film really has.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So, that's whether you agree with what happens in the film or not, I might even go so far as to say that it's a classic of the genre, just because of its longevity and its power, which again are 2 points that I don't think anybody could really argue against. So
Sure.
if you disagree with me, listeners, my apologies, but maybe take some time to watch the movie and maybe your opinion will change and maybe it won't. Either way, we're still friends.
Sure, and you disagree with any of my opinions, go to my blog and please post as harsh criticism as you want, as many times as you want, because it's only going to make the film grow in popularity.
Exactly, exactly, which is the irony of it all, of course.
Oh, absolutely. And I closed my own view that same statement, just that it is these people that absolutely detest the film that have sort of created the status for it, and they're the ones that are really driving the people to the film and making it what it is today. So thank you.
Right, of course. I mean, just all the films that were included on the Video Nasties list. I mean, that, in effect, was supposed to be like a blacklist of sorts for parents and other, parental figures to kind of keep an eye out for these, for these bad films, for these corrupting films. But on the flip side, for fans of the genre, it became a wish list. And that those became the movies that they wanted to seek out, and that's the effect that that type of, uh, you know, that type of censorship has. I mean, you compare it to anything else that's ever happened. I mean, look at the whole spiel that happened in the 50s with the horror comics. I mean, they were loved before, but the minute that the Comics Code of Authority was impinged on it and they became these bad and terrible things, I think people in general have a desire to seek forbidden things out. It's just human nature practically. So once you do something like that, you're only feeding the desire for people to seek those things out, which it's been happening for so long you think people would catch on to that, but for some reason they still do it, and it'll just have the same effect for as long as they carry actions like those out.
No, absolutely.
One of the things I wanted to ask you as well, as we're nearing the end here, I'm pretty sure that I know the answer to this as well as the viewers, but I wanted to ask it nonetheless. Do you think that it's possible, maybe not necessarily for yourself, but just for anybody in general, to view Cannibal Holocaust solely as entertainment, or do you think that the only natural way is to view it with that message in mind, that message that uh, these people are the real savages, and we should all take a long, hard look at ourselves in the mirror, that type of thing, or do you think that it can just be watched for kicks and giggles, so to speak?
Yeah, no, I think that people can absolutely watch the film just as a pure exploitative gore fest, and I think many people do. I think that many people are initially attracted to it specifically for that. I think that this fan base comes from exploitative films like the zombie films, Lucio Fulci, and The Dawn of the Dead, and they want to see the next evolution in shock cinema. They want to see people having their guts ripped out, and their penises chopped off, and babies being ripped out of mothers, and all that great shit. And like on a purely visceral level, I can't say that I dispute it. I love the film, and as a horror fan, you can't do better than Cannibal Holocaust. I mean, it's perhaps the goriest film in early Italian cinema, or I guess in 80s Italian cinema, I should say. So I think it can be looked at completely outside of its social and political significance. I think that that is something that you get in repeat viewings and something that you have to really look for if you want to see it. I think that the majority of fans, when they go into it, they're typically the gore crowd, and they sit down with friends, with beer, with popcorn, and they're too busy oohing and ahhing and wincing and closing their eyes and
Yeah.
laughing to really give it any additional mind. So I think it can definitely be separated, and I think maybe it's a safer film when you do separate it, because then it becomes a movie, then it becomes entertainment, and it doesn't become this venture into the darkest depths of the human psyche, where we're taking a look at like you said, we're taking a look at ourselves, we're taking a look at the media, and what we sort of glorify in what we're watching and what we think is acceptable. So I hate to say that watching it for the exploitation is a safer means of doing so, but at least then you're able to create that sort of like safety net of fiction versus reality. When the film starts becoming more real and you look at it like, what if this were actual footage and what if this were taken from a camera of someone that is dead, then it becomes much more devastating on a psychological level. If you're just looking, just look at it for the gore and you're safe. You're in a ridiculous setting. You're in the jungle. It's laughable. You got these half naked, like, tribesmen running around chopping penises off, so have a good time, whatever.
No, I totally agree with you. It's, that goes for any horror movie, really. The more you distance yourself, the safer you are emotionally. But, and I think the animal deaths really bring it home for people just because they are genuine and shocking. It's harder for people to separate themselves from the movie with, those actions in mind. But like you say, if you just look at it as a purely exploitative movie, it's just another grindhouse flick, then yeah, you could just chew on some popcorn while the cannibals are chewing on some innards and be done with it. But just because the movie is as powerful as it is, it's really tough for somebody to do that. And in a way, it might not be safe for somebody to do that, at least in the context of the animal deaths, because they being real, it may not be the best thing for you psychologically to view it as just another effect with those deaths anyway.
Yeah, and that's what does make it a little more jarring because yeah, you can go into it expecting just to see blood and guts and stuff and have a good time, but then you are faced with reality no matter how you look at it. Boom, you have like animals being slaughtered, and you have a monkey's head being chopped in half.
Yeah.
Like there's no separating yourself from it at that point. Like you can do it for most of it. You can suspend disbelief, and as soon as you get to the animal deaths, it throws you right back into reality. There's no separation there. There's no safety net. It is reality, and you can't interpret it as anything else.
Exactly. So, well, since we're at the end of our lovely discussion here on Cannibal Holocaust, I wanted to ask you, as I always do, even though we've kind of touched upon practically everything that can be talked about in regards to this movie, I just wanted to ask you outright, why did you choose Cannibal Holocaust for your Sinister spotlight?
Well, I was given the choice of several. Well, I can't say I was given the choice. I gave you the choice of several movies, and I said, well, "What do you think would be most interesting?" And they were some of my favorite movies. So we had Battle Royale on there, Troll 2, of course, awesome movie, Blood Diner, which is one of my all-time favorites. But if we're having a intelligent, a thought-provoking conversation about any horror film, with Blood Diner, it would just be a running commentary of how hilarious it is. Troll, you can only comment on how absolutely absurd and ridiculous it is, but it's hard to really get into any deeper level or emotionality when it comes to these films.
Right.
With Cannibal Holocaust, there's so much to discuss. Just an hour of time doesn't even do the film justice. You could go on and write a college thesis paper about it. There's no lack of subject matter. There's no lack of opinion, and it's ideal for a situation like this between not only two fans but two critics, two friends, two people that truly can appreciate its significance and can discuss both its merits and its flaws, of which it has many. So it's the ideal candidate for a format like this.
Yeah, and again, I couldn't agree with you more, and it's been a hell of a ride. And to be honest with you, I think our discussion has definitely shined a little bit of more perspective on me with Cannibal Holocaust. I feel like I can almost view it. And again, I'm still not gonna get past those animal deaths. They're just brutal. But I think in a way I can almost appreciate the film a little bit more having discussed it with you tonight. And it's been crazy fun, and I've definitely enjoyed having you on the show. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this crazy, controversial little movie.
And if it were for people like you out there that actually find opinions of other like-minded fans important, I like horror movies wouldn't be around. My website exists, your website exists, all of our websites and our different social medias exist for the sharing of ideas, and so that we can explore these films, we can learn and grow as fans and as critics. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk. I love the fact that people actually do stop by the blog, but the only reason I write is because I love these films, and I want other people to have the same experiences that I had. So I try to present them to them in an objectionable, and not objectionable, but that allows people to get a feel for the film, draw intrigue, and allow them to then go on and experience the film that I've grown to love over the years. Now that we're coming to a close, I do want to make one shout out outside of, I have tons of friends up there that I love dearly, critics, readers, and writers that I've grown to know over the past couple of years. One person that's really stood out and that I have to make special mention to is Jer, iZombie Lover, that's taken over He's done a tremendous service to all of the horror bloggers out there. When the HBA was formed, it was just a few of us, and it's an extremely time-consuming thing to uphold, but it's an important resource for horror bloggers and for writers that's been a real positive force within the genre, and Jared's done an awesome job, so I wanted to throw that out there real quick before we end it here.
Oh, of course, and he has done a wonderful job upkeeping the headquarters, so to speak, and it's an awesome looking place. And if you happen to be a horror blogger and haven't heard of this wonderful facility, the Horror Blogger Alliance is your way to be a part of something greater, so to speak. You don't have to give us any money or anything like that. It's just a way for all of us to connect to each other's writing, and like you say, that's what we're here for. As much as, you know, we might want to improve our writing or expose ourselves to more films, basically at the end of the day what it comes down to is we're all here because of the love we have for this genre, and you can't get enough opinions about any one movie. So if you have an opinion about Cannibal Holocaust or any movie, you know, we're always willing to hear it because we're just here for each other. We're practically family. So it's a beautiful way to end the podcast, and I thank you, Carl, for, you know, putting it so wonderfully for everybody out there.
I really can't stress it enough. Everyone's opinion counts. Everyone's opinion is right. If you like writing, write. Talk about these films. That's what keeps them alive, and that's what makes them important. You justify their existence by expressing yourself. So, all the writers out there, you are important. Everything you do is important, and it's lasting. It'll stay there. Internet is a perfect venue.
Of course, and like we say, this does bring this episode of Sinister Spotlight to an end. Carl, I thank you again so much for taking the time to join us, and for those of you listening, definitely stop by I Like Horror Movies. It is one of the most comprehensive sites you'll ever see, and like Carl says, he exposes you to more movies than you thought could ever even exist. So take the time out of your day to see some movies from a true horror fan's perspective. And Carl, again, for the 100th time, thank you so much.
No, thank you. It's been a blast.
And it definitely has been. And thank you all for listening, and I hope it's been a blast for you. Have a good night, everybody.